Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining. We have put together a presentation for the 2021 calendar year consolidated fiscal report. We've been hosting these webinars for the last few cycles, and we think we're getting better at it each time around. So we hope you find it very helpful when completing this year's CFR. We've had feedback from the previous webinars, and we've had good feedback, and we hope to continue on that trend. We have a good sized crowd today with approximately 700 attendees spread throughout all the different agencies that require CFR. So hopefully we don't have any issues with WebEx. All the webinar sessions will be recorded and posted on YouTube. So if you have a colleague that couldn't make it, or you just like to listen to the trainings on the CFR, again, you'll be able to. We will send an email out to all the providers notifying them of when they're available and where they can be found. My name is Ken Glenmeyer, a representative from OPWDD, and I will be the host for the two webinars we have scheduled this week. Today's panelists will be as follows. Representing OASIS is Paul Green and Paul Sutton. Representing OMH is Ann Hoffman, Michelle Chilinsky, and Kathy Katz. Representing OPWDD is Francis Vasilio, Alpa Amin, and myself. Representing SED is Jahida Benatar and Nelly Gutos. And then representing Department of Health is Jeffrey Nickerson. Also, just a key piece of information, we do have a survey that will pop up at the end of the event. We would greatly appreciate you taking the time to fill out the survey so that we could continue to make these trainings better and better each time. So this is important, and hopefully you guys had an opportunity to check out the previous questions and answers that have been posted on the OMH website. We strongly encourage all attendees to ask questions through the Q&A function in the webinar. It is on your right-hand side, and you might have to click the arrow next to the Q&A to open up the dialog box. If you don't see it, you might have to click the three dots at the bottom of the WebEx and then click on Q&A. We will not be addressing any questions today, but we plan on answering all the questions and posting answers online, along with a recording of this webinar so that everyone can get the benefit of the webinar and the questions asked. Next slide, this is always good to know for when you have questions. This slide shows how to contact each agency. Most of us right now are still working a hybrid in-office remote schedule, so all the agencies still prefer email contact. New York State Office of Children and Family Services providers may submit questions regarding their CFR submission to the OMH CFR unit, and also Department of Health providers may submit questions regarding their CFR submission by email to mhrs@health.ny.gov, which is listed above. The next slide, so any claims questions can go to the following. As noted on the previous slide, email would be the preferred method, as we're working a hybrid schedule where we're in and out of the office. By the end of this seminar, we hope to accomplish the following goals. We would like to introduce providers to the CFR manual and CFR software. We would like to provide New York State agency contact information for specific questions not covered during the training session. We also would like to help providers become more familiar with the CFR and also discuss important policies and principles and rules regarding completion of the CFR. I will now pass on the presenting to our first panelist, Francis Vasilio.
Good morning. My name is Francis Vasilio. I work in OPWDD's CFR unit. Those of you who operate programs funded by us, I'm sure you've received correspondence from me, for better or worse. Our goals, Ken already covered the goals, so There we go. All right. The first step in completing the CFR is to take a look at the CFR manual. It has 9 general overview sections. There's a section for each of the core, claiming, and supplemental schedules, and there are numerous appendices containing detailed information. The manuals are available. You see that web address there at the bottom of the screen. That's at the SED CFR webpage, and at that webpage, you can get a lot of information. Even if you've done CFRs in the past, it's important that you take a look at the appendices, at the programs that you offer, to see if there's been any changes since the last CFR that you submitted. I'm having trouble getting the page up and page down to work here. No, that's going the wrong way. Sorry about that. This is what the SED web page looks like. From this page, you can get not only the current manual and the transmittal letters that highlight changes from year to year, but you can also go back to previous cycles in case you get a letter asking you to modify a previously submitted CFR. This is where you can look up some information on that if necessary. Another important feature of this page is the extensions that you can do. Now, you don't need to do that for all the agencies, but that's where you also apply for your extensions from May 1st to June 1st for your deadline. The CFR is how you report the expenses that went in delivering the services we funded for you. This one CFR program that you'll download on your computer is used by 6 different state agencies for you to give detailed information on how you used our funding and how you, what expenses you incurred. The information we get back to you from the CFR is used for us to set rates, to reimburse you. It's for cost of living increases. It's for policy analysis by the legislature, the state agencies, the governor's office, DOB. There's also a section of the CFR that is the claiming document for you to get back your final payments on any contracts that you have with us. The methods of accounting for the CFR, if you're doing a full CFR, the CFR has to be done in full accrual accounting. If you're the DMH and D2 and 3, which are claiming schedules, you have options of full accrual or modified accrual or a cash basis. Filers of many abbreviated CFRs can use those same 3 options, a full accrual, modified accrual, or cash basis to submit their CFR. When we talk about full accrual accounting, what we mean is, for those of you who aren't accounting majors, is if you provided a service in December, you submitted the billing for it in January, you got paid by March, that's, you still have to report all of that in December. The revenues, the expenses, the units of service provided. Keep in mind that the salary expense that you incur is not based on the date of the paycheck issued. So what you report in your CFR for salary expenses may not match the quarterly payroll reports that you prepare. There are 4 types of CFRs. There's a full CFR, there's an mini abbreviated CFR, an abbreviated CFR, and an Article 28 abbreviated CFR. Most of you will report the same type of CFRs in your previous submittal. You will check the matrices in Section 2 of the manual to determine what type of CFR you're required to file. Keep in mind, if you have $1 of Medicaid funding, OPWDD requires you to file a full CFR. And when you are funded by more than one of the state agencies, if any one of them requires you to file a full CFR, then that's what you're going to be filing for everyone. This is an example of this is one of the matrices. This one is a combination matrix, but there are also individual ones for each of the state agencies. And you go through and you answer a series of yes or no questions, and that'll tell you what type of CFR you have to file. It'll tell you what type of supplemental information is required to go with it. The reporting period is either ending 12/31 or 6/30. If you're New York City based, it's June 30th. If you're on Long Island or upstate, it's December 31st. And the key issue is, where are the corporate headquarters located? Some of you are lucky enough to get to file more than once a year. You may be located in Westchester and offering a program, having a program operated in the Bronx, in which case you could file twice a year. And fortunately for you, your secondary submission is usually just a mini abbreviated CFR. Also, if you're an upstate or Long Island provider and you receive special legislative grants or member items, you usually have to file a secondary submission with a June 30 end date for OPWDD. You can have other end dates for that to match the state fiscal year for the other state agencies. Due dates. So for calendar filers, your due date for most of the agencies is June 1st. For OMH and SED, that deadline is May 1st, although you can go online and apply for an automatic extension to June 1st. You go to the SED website, as I mentioned before, and that's where you can file for that extension. It's important that these deadlines are met, which means you, as the person preparing the CFR, has to come up with a plan so that you can get your ledger information to your CPAs, to get financial statements prepared, to get those financial statements back into your board for approval. You have to get the CFR completed and to your CPA so that if it's certification by the CPA is required, they have time to review it. And in order to meet the deadline, you have to file not just the CFR, but all the required certifications and the financial statement. Sometimes you have parent agency information that's required as well. Each state agency has different penalties in place for those who fail to meet the deadlines. I won't go into details for each of the state agencies. I think each of them cover that later. You see, they include sanctions and withholding of payments for OASIS, also for, I see, a 20% withholding for OMH in some cases. For OPWDD, we have probably the strictest penalties. It's a 2% penalty, and you never get the money back even if you come into compliance later. And if you fail to file that calendar CFR by August 1st, you can face a 50% penalty, which may put you out of business. We're in the process of penalizing some agencies that way currently. SED also has penalties. Again, the details of the penalties, some of them are listed there on the screen. Some of them you'll be able to get in more detail later on. Some of you who apply for that extension and also get LGU funding may need to contact the LGU to determine whether or not that extension to June 1st is going to be an issue. In most cases, it will not be, but you should always contact the LGU just to let them know you'll be filing by June 1st. In order to submit to your CFR, you have to go to the OMH website. You can do that through the CFR program, through the utilities. You'll prepare a file for upload. It'll take you right to the OMH webpage, and you can upload not just the CFR there, you can also upload the financial statement, the parent agency allocation information, and also all the required certifications. That is the recommended way to file all of this information. One thing we don't really need, and some people insist on doing, is mailing us hard copies of the entire CFR, which is a lot of expense for you, and they end up in our recycling bin. So, although internet submission is preferred for the certifications, if you need to email a copy, that's available. The handouts that you printed have email addresses where you can send those. If you do the upload, one upload takes care of all the different state agencies that are reported on the CFR, and that's really the easiest way for you and for us. But if you need to email something instead, you have that option. There's also, but not for DOH or OCFS, those have to be uploaded. Keep in mind that sometimes you'll have to revise a CFR, make some changes. At that point, there'll be a new DCN attached, and we'll need some new certification pages. OASIS has a list of certifications, all of them basically, although they'll accept an attestation statement instead of a new II. SEDs more apt to require a II. The other agencies, a new Cfr I is usually all that's required, although if that file is going to be used later, you may be asked at some point if you need to file a new II for it to be used. If you're emailing certifications, there's some naming conventions that we ask you to use. Makes it easier for us to identify and move these files around once they get up here. Financial statements. So you only have to upload a financial statement one time, regardless of how many times you have to file amended CFRs. Uploading a draft financial statement accomplishes nothing. It has to be the final approved financial statement. They're not required for many abbreviated filers, but it's important that we get that final by the deadline. And that means it's important that you give time for your board to approve it. The financial statement, it's preferred that they match the beginning and end dates of your reporting period, but we know that's not always the case. The financial statement you upload has to have an end date during that period, though. So the end date for a calendar 21 CFR has to be sometime during that year. The software that's used is downloaded onto your PC. Just a note of caution, this software doesn't work that well on servers, and it doesn't work that well with Apple computers. For these reasons, and all the firewalls have been installed, we're in the process of creating a new web-based CFR. But for now, for this last cycle, you're still going to be downloading the software from this website and placing it on your own PC there and working with it that way. If you have problems making the CFR software work, or you think it's not working properly, this is the phone number you want to call. These are the technical people who write the CFR programming, and they're much better than your CFR reviewers at answering computer-related questions about why the software is not functioning very well. One thing to remember, well, we'll get to that later. If you're funded by more than one state agency, it's just going to be one CFR that you file that will include the information for all those different state agencies, the programs that are funded through there. The program is pretty sophisticated. It's updated twice a year. If you have to go back and amend a previous CFR, you can use the latest software, and the software knows which job title codes and program codes are appropriate for each cycle. So there's no problem there. You can also, if you're required to go back and you had to file a mini abbreviated off-cycle CFR, you can use the latest software. It can work on both, all the different reporting periods that works. When you're doing the calendar 28 CFR, you'll be using version 38 of the CFR software, which should be available. The goal is in March, you won't be able to start your CFR, you won't be able to complete a CFR until you have that latest software. The document control number. This is very important. When you complete your work on your CFR, you go through a process where you validate the CFR. The program itself checks for any obvious errors. And then once you meet the criteria, it assigns a DCN, a document control number. This is the file number that will be attached to the file you upload through the internet. That same file number, DCN, has to appear at the bottom of each of the certifications that you give to us. Many people, I just got a set yesterday where people complete the CFR I, the contact information, and immediately print the certification pages before they've validated and had a DCN assigned. Those certifications without a DCN are not valid, and filing them does not have you meet the deadline for filing your CFR. This is the home page for OMH for their CFR homepage, and you can see there's options there for uploading CFRs. There's options there for downloading the CFR program. There's also an important link there for the announcement mailing list. Every agency should have 2 people registered on the announcement mailing list. This is, you'll get your email in March letting you know that the CFR program is available for download. If we find that there's a problem with the CFR program and we have to issue a patch to correct a problem, you'll be notified if you're registered. If you're not registered and there's a problem, then you'll go through the same angst that somebody else already went through that's already been taken care of with a new version of the program. But since you didn't register for the program, you didn't get notified. Also, you should have at least 2 people from every agency, because there's always the chance one of you is going to hit lottery and not be here, be on a beach someplace next year, and we still want to reach your agency. Some tips for the record keeping to make this easier. If possible, try to structure your general ledger to match the programming that you have to report on. If it's a program with multiple, where you have to report by site, then try to split your ledger up that way. Try to keep track during the year. Sometimes you have staff splitting time between different programs or different program sites, and it's a lot easier to keep track of that as you go, rather than at the end of the year and wondering where so-and-so was spending their time last March. Expenses and revenue should be compared to what was reported previously. Now, I know the 2020 CFR with COVID and shutdowns and so forth may not be a good comparison, but probably your 2019 CFR would have numbers. And if it looks like halfway through the year that your numbers are not in line, then maybe somebody's giving you bad information on how many units of service provided, or something else. Also, if you've got a contract, it's a lot easier, and you see that your expenses are going to be much greater than what was in your budget. It's a lot easier to get those budgets modified before the end of the reporting period rather than waiting till after the fact. Non-allowable costs. A cost must be reasonable and necessary for providing services in both its nature and amount. Appendix X has a list of non-allowable costs. We have a line in Cfr 1 for each, and Cfr 3 for each of the in each of those schedules for each program, where if you've got some costs that you've booked in your ledger that aren't reimbursable, aren't allowable, then you can back those costs out there. You'll report them as an expense and then back them out as non-allowable. Some examples of non-allowable costs, and keep in mind, an expense may be permitted by the IRS. It may be okay according to GAAP. It just may not be something that we allow for determining your program costs for CFR purposes. Costs that are not properly related to patient care and principally afford diversion, amusement, or entertainment for the owners or employees of a program are not reimbursable. If you have a big holiday party with alcoholic beverages, well, in no case is alcoholic beverage reimbursable, and if the party's just for staff, that's not going to be reimbursable. Any penalties or violations that you incur are not reimbursable. Any other benefit, the benefits that you apply to your employees for entertainment or what have you are not going to be reimbursable. Another category of non-reimbursable expenses has to do with related party transactions. You're only allowed to claim the lower of the fair market value or the actual cost of the goods or services that you procure from a related party. We'll go into more detail about that when we cover Schedule 5. Some fringe benefits are not allowed. Basically, if the fringe benefit is not available to all your employees, it's just for your top executives, that's not going to be an allowable expense. One example of that are certain 457F retirement benefits. Sometimes the personal use of automobiles by your top staff would be a non-allowable expense. So these are things that you want to keep an eye out for during the course of the year and to track them. And now it's time to do the CFR, and I'm going to hand you off to Alpa Amin.
Good morning. This is Alpa Amin from OPWDD. I will begin time to do CFR section. After downloading the NVIDIA CFRS software, an icon is placed on the computer desktop, which will reflect CFRS 38.0 in the center of the icon. Double-click on the icon to open the software application. If there are problems opening the software, try right-clicking the icon and select Run as an Administrator from the list of the options. This is the first screen displayed when NVIDIA CFRS software has been opened. One of the 5 options available must be selected by clicking radio button to the left of the option. Importing data saves time and ensures that all agency and program definition data remains consistent with the prior period. Importing data. This screen is to import a CFR from prior version of a CFR software. From the drop-down box, select the version of the software and highlight the file or browse to where the file is located. Select all data, which will include all agency and program site information as well as financial data. Or select master data only, which will include all agency and program site information without financial data. Select yes to the warning and then select import and close. If creating a submission of a different type and or a different reporting period, check change submission definition and update the necessary items at the bottom of the screen. Select validate and then import. Following are the steps of how to create a new submission. CFRS new submission. The information required for new submissions are submission type, state agency, provider number, reporting cycle, and reporting period. The sample shows selection of more than one NVIDIA agency to choose from. User description is optional and is for personal identification purpose in submission directory. Necessary agency information. To complete your CFR, you will need the following information about your agency: your legal name, 5-digit agency code assigned by NVIDIA CFR agencies, street address of your agency's central administrative offices, county name where your agency's administrative offices are located, federal ID number, period covered by your agency's independently audited financial statement, name, phone number, and email address of your agency's CEO, president, chair of the board of the directors, and the persons to contact with questions regarding cost report and claim schedule. The president, chair of board of directors is not required for governmental or proprietary agency submissions. Data entry fields with the bolded field titles are required fields and data must be entered. The school code field is only used for providers submitting CFRs that include SED programs. The period covered by the provider's audited financial statement must be entered. Financial statement dates entered all will determine whether CFR II or CFR II-A will be used for CPA certification. When using the import function, all data elements will be populated except financial statement reporting period. Click Save to proceed. Cfrs maintain or create program site. Program site must be created before financial information can be entered. There are 4 choices listed on the screen. Program site definition information. To complete your CFRs, you will need the following information about your agency's program site: the types of the program your agency operates, which invoice agency certifies and or funds the program to be reported, the 4-digit program code and 2-digit index for each program site operated, program site identification number for each program site operated. Refer to Section 8 of the CFR manual for more information about site codes. The physical address for each program site operated, the county in which each defined program site operates. This information can also be imported from another submission. To create a new program site, complete the required data and select Save. To update an existing program site, highlight the row, make the change to the data and select Save. If during the importing process you receive an error code regarding a change to the program name, then from the Update a Program option, you should reselect the program to confirm the name change and satisfy error code. CFRs navigation. Only the required schedules for the CFR submission type selected are displayed on the CFR navigation screen. Certification schedule, CFR agency identification and certification statement, CFR II and II independent accountants report, Cfr III county and YC certification statement, and Cfr Iv Supplemental attestation schedule. The certification schedules requiring data input will be listed first on the navigation screen. All CFRs do not require all CFR certification pages. Refer to Section 2 of the CFR manual for exceptions to the requirements. Submission through the web page is the preferred method for submitting the certification and will be discussed in the detail later in the presentation. In the software, non-enterable fields are gray. On CFR I, the information in the gray area has been carried forward from the provided definition screen. When importing master data, always verify that the imported data is still accurate and correct. All bolded field names are required. Accurate CEO and fiscal contact emails are especially important. Click copy contact if the CFR contact and the stated claim contact person is the same. CFR agency identification is required for all CFR submissions. It must be signed by your executive director, CEO. CFR Iv Schedule signed by anyone other than the noted parties may not be accepted. It requires contact information for an agency fiscal contact and president chair of the board of the directors. CFR Iv should be uploaded via the CFRs upload page where it will be distributed accordingly to each invoice agency represented on the CFR. The schedule signed must have the same DCN as the CFR submitted. On CFR II, complete all applicable fields and then click Save and or select a different tab to proceed. CFR II accountant's report is required for most full CFR submissions. It should be signed by independent certified public accountant, sole practitioner, partner of the CPA firm or CPA firm that audited and certified the CFR. It should be uploaded via the CFR upload page where it will be distributed accordingly to each invoice agency represented on the CFR. And it must be signed schedule must have the same DCN as the CFR submitted. To determine if schedule CFR II or II, CFR III, and the CFR IV are required, Refer to section 2.0, 11.0, and 12.0 of the CFR manual. CFR II and II accountants report. In support of the CFR II Appendix AA audit guideline has been developed by the CFR Interagency Committee with the assistance of the Task Force of the New York State Society of Certified Public Accountants. The objective of the guidance is to provide uniformity in the scope of work completed by independent accountants on the CFR schedule. Most recently, the language in the CFR II has been modified to account for the enacted statement on auditing standard SAS number 134 effective for the calendar year 2021, CFR reporting period and forward. CFR II or II will be printed based on the audited financial statement reporting period entered in the agency definition. II when the period covered by general purpose financial statement corresponds to the CFR reporting period, and II when the period covered by the general purpose financial statement differs from the CFR reporting period. The audited financial statement reporting period must be manually entered every year, even when importing data from prior submissions. Counties and other municipalities have three options for CPA certification of full CFR submission type: CFR II, and compliance review. Refer to section Appendix C for more information on compliance review. CFR III County, New York City certification statement. Complete all applicable fields and then click Save and go to Proceed. The CFR III must be completed if aid to localities funding is received through a local county contract or direct contract with the MS state agency. If funded through a direct contract, the executive director, CEO, must sign the left side of the certification statement designated for voluntary local service provider. If funded through a local county contract, the left side of the certification must be signed by your executive director, CEO, and the right side of the certification statement must be signed by the County Director of Community Mental Health Services. CFR III is not required for providers operating only rate-based and/or unfunded programs. Counties must have the middle certification signed by the county treasurer and the right certification signed by Director of Community Mental Health Services. CFR III should be uploaded via the CFRS upload page, where it will be distributed accordingly to each NYS agency represented on the CFR. The schedule signed must have the same DCN as the CFR submitted. Do not wait for the county signature of the CFR III prior to submission. Send a signed copy of CFR III to the funding DMH state agency at the same time it is sent to the county. CFR Iv Supplemental Attestation Schedule. The CFR Iv Schedule is required as a part of full abbreviated or Article 28 abbreviated CFR submissions of not-for-profit and proprietary providers submitting to OSS, OMH, and OPWDD. The CFR Iv is a series of questions regarding the fiscal status of the agency. CFR Iv Schedule is used to report agency identifying data and serves as a certification statement by the service provider's chief executive officer attesting to the validity of the information contained in the document under the penalty prescribed in accordance with the Article 175 of the New York State Penal Law. The CFR Iv Schedule is not required for SED only filers, governmental service providers, and many abbreviated CFRs. CFRs navigation box. The CFRs navigation box will appear highlighting the next recommended schedule to be completed. Schedules can be completed in any order. However, data will not be seen until the feeder schedule is completed. Click Go to proceed. This concludes my section. Here is the next speaker, Michelle.
Hi, good morning. Next, we'll be discussing Schedule Cfr 4 Personal Services Program Site. This schedule is used to report the salaries and wages of your employees by position title code. It is a required schedule for all CFR submission types, and there are two sections to complete. The first section is Program Site, Program Admin, LGU Admin. To complete this section, select the state agency, the program, and site at the top of the schedule from the drop-down boxes. Next, click the Add button and select the position title code from the drop-down box and select the standard work week, followed by entering the annual hours paid and the amount paid for the employee in that position title code. The FTE column will automatically calculate. Complete these steps until all position title codes have been entered into this section. Next, click on the Agency Admin tab of the schedule. This is the second section of Schedule Cfr 4. The salaries and wages of your administrative staff are reported in this section. To complete this section, click the Add button, select the position title code, followed by the standard work week, enter the annual hours paid and the annual amount paid for that employee working in that position title code, and the FTE column will automatically calculate. Complete these steps until all position title codes have been entered, and then click the Save button to save your work. So employees of your agency are reported on this schedule. These individuals typically receive W-2s from your agency and are considered to be employees. The agency admin personal services and expenses are reported in the second section, the agency admin tab, using position title code series 600. Remember to report all agency administrative staff on this schedule. Position title codes and position titles are listed in Appendix R of the CFR manual. Select the position title that best matches the functions of your employee. Please note that some position title codes are limited to a particular state agency. In this example, PTC 211 is limited for use for OASIS providers only. The position title codes are located in Appendix R of the CFR manual. They are classified using a numeric series. Support staff are reported on the 100 series. Direct care staff are reported on the 200 series. Clinical staff are reported on the 300 series. Production staff on the 400 series. Program admin administration staff are reported using the 500 series. Agency administration staff are reported using the 600 series, and LGU staff are reported on the 700 series. If at any time it becomes necessary to delete a row of data, simply highlight the row and click the Delete button. The standard work week must be between 35 hours and 45 hours per week on this schedule. The totals are shown by column for hours paid, FTEs, and amount paid. And where applicable, employee hours and salaries paid should be allocated between programs and or position title codes. The next slide shows the calculation of an FTE. This is automatically calculated on the software. The calculation is the hours paid divided by the standard work week times 52 weeks. In this example, the employee works 22.5 hours a week for 40 hours during the year, totaling 900 hours for the year. That is divided by the full-time hours for the position, which is calculated by multiplying 35 hours per week times 52 weeks, and that calculates to a 0.495 FTE. So the total amounts of personal services calculated by program on Schedule Cfr 4 transfer to other schedules. On a full CFR, the total personal services for the program staff transferred to Schedule Cfr 1, line 16, and the total amount paid for administrative staff and personal services transfers to Schedule Cfr 3, line 1. And on an abbreviated, in Article 28 abbreviated CFR, the total salaries and wages paid for the program staff transferred to DMH 1, line 6. Next, we'll discuss Schedule Cfr 4A, Contracted Direct Care and Clinical Personal Services. This schedule is completed for a full CFR only. It's important to note that the direct care hours, 200 series, and clinical hours, 300 series, are an important part of OPWDD's rate rationalization formula. Please make sure that the data is entered accurately on the schedule. To complete the schedule, select the state agency, the program, and the site from the top of the schedule, then click the Add button and select the position title code from the drop-down box, and enter the annual hours paid and the annual amount paid for that position title code. Complete these steps until all position codes are entered, and then click the Save button. So contracted direct care and clinical staff positions are reported using the 200 and 300 position title code series. Contracted staff are individuals that are not issued a W-2 by the provider agency. The position title codes are found in Appendix R of the CFR manual. The hours paid, amount paid for the year must be entered. Hours paid cannot be left blank. And the total contracted direct care and clinical personal services carries forward to Schedule Cfr 1, line 35. Next, we'll discuss completing Schedule Cfr 1 program site. There are 3 sections to Schedule Cfr 1, General Information, Expenses, and Revenue. Schedule Cfr 1 is completed in a full CFR only. In the General Information section, data on lines 1 through 6 and 8 carries forward from the program site definition screen. Those lines are grayed out. For Medicaid eligible programs, report both the Medicaid provider agreement number on line 7A and the national provider ID number on line 7B. Both numbers should be associated with the program site being reported. It is critical that the units of service delivered during the reporting period are captured, counted, and reported accurately and correctly. Inaccurate units of service reported is a reason for the rejection of a CFR. It is expected that providers will train their staff regarding the appropriate measurement of units of service for the program types they operate. The unit of service measurement for the programs on the CFR are reported in Appendices E, F, G, H, HH, and I for the New York State agencies. It's also expected that providers will ensure that information is recorded at the time of service, the service is delivered, and that the data is available in the format of the CFR. So in Section 13 of the CFR manual, line 13 was updated and expanded. Line 13 is the total units of service. line 13A, Medicaid fee-for-service unit of service, 13B, Medicaid managed care unit of service, and 13C, all other units of service. For OMH, the total units of service transfer from Schedule OMH1, and the Medicaid fee-for-service and Medicaid managed care units of service transfer from Schedule OMH2, and the all other units of service calculates. For all of other state agencies, these units of service measurements are entered on those lines. Also for OASIS, units of service on the CFR must match the OASIS monthly service delivery system for the period covered by the CFR. The next section is the expenses section that we'll go over. The following expense categories are located on Schedule CFR 1, personal services, vacation leave accruals, fringe benefits, other than personal services or OTPS, equipment, property, and agency administration. The personal services expenses totals carry forward from Schedule CFR 4 and are reported on line 16. Report the increase or decrease in vacation accruals from previous year on line 17. Mandated fringe benefits are reported on line 18. Examples of these are FICA, Medicare, workers' comp, unemployment insurance, New York State disability, and New York State family leave. Non-mandated fringe benefits are reported on line 19, such as dental and medical insurance and pension expense. Costs for maintenance, minor repairs, and contracts for housekeeping, garbage, and snow removal are reported on line 22. Participant incidentals such as participant entertainment, recreation, summer camps, clothing are reported on line 26. The cost of all program site and or program administration non-adaptive equipment purchased during the cost period with a value of less than $5,000 or a useful life of less than 2 years are reported on line 28. The contracted direct care and clinical personal service carries forward from Schedule CFR 4A and are reported on line 35. Include the cost for program supplies, medical supplies, printing, copying, postage, computer software on line 36. The insurance costs for general liability bonding, professional and medical malpractice, vehicle or other insurance costs related to program site and program administration are reported on line 39. Do not report insurance expenses related to equipment or property on this line. So in the OTPS section, if there are additional expenses that cannot be classified on the predefined lines, they may be reported on line 40 other. This is a line detail box line. Click on the icon in the right corner, which is an ellipsis or 3 dots, and the line detail box will open. On this line detail box, the provider can use a number of predefined lines or may add additional lines by clicking the Add button and adding a description and a value for the expense. Once all expenses are entered, you would click Save and close this box. So a common error on the CFR that we find on line 40, which is the other line for OTPS, are expenses listed that may be better classified on other predefined lines. So in this example, we have printing expenses in the amount of $1,227 that would be better classified on line 36, supplies and materials, and then rubbish removal would be better classified on line 22, repairs and maintenance. And to summarize, the OTPS equipment and property categories each have other lines for miscellaneous items. Information is entered through a line detail box. Details required for expenses of $1,000 or more. And expenses less than $1,000 may be grouped together in a predefined line labeled all items less than $1,000 each. Do not report items on line 40, OTPS other, that should be reported on a specifically defined line. Bad debt expense is not allowable on the CFR. It is reported as a line expense and then adjusted out on the non-allowable line of the schedule. At Schedule Cfr 1, it is reported as an expense on line 40 and backed out as non-allowable on line 66. On Schedule Cfr 2, column 9, line 4, it's reported as an expense and adjusted out as non-allowable on line 8. On Schedule Cfr 3, line 17, it is reported as an expense and adjusted out as non-allowable on line 41. Additional information may be found in the FAQ section of the CFR manual on page 8.13. Certain assets are depreciated, and the depreciation expense is reported on this schedule. Vehicle depreciation is reported on line 44, equipment depreciation on line 45, building depreciation on line 51, and building and land improvement depreciation on 52. All items with an individual cost of $5,000 or more and a useful life of 2 or more years must be depreciated. Appendix O of the CFR manual has additional guidance on depreciation and amortization of assets. Line 66 is the you report non-allowable costs and adjustments through a line detail box. Negative numbers cannot be entered in the line detail box. Appendix X is an excellent resource for a list of non-allowable costs for CFR. And reports the amount in excess of actual cost or fair market value for related party transactions disclosed on Schedule Cfr 5 on line 66 as non-allowable. And this is a screenshot of line 66, which is the non-allowable adjustments line for Schedule Cfr 1. It is a line detail box. And to open the box, you would click on the ellipsis icon, which would be presented with 3 dots. Once it is open, you click the Add button and add a description of the expense, the location of where the expense is reported on which line on the CFR, and the amount of the expense. And click Save, and then Close. Lines 68, A, B, D, and E will be discussed during the OPWDD agency-specific section. The next section is the revenue section. Participant fees are reported in line 69. These are revenues received from program participants in excess of SSI and SSA. Report Medicaid fee-for-service revenue on line 72A, Medicaid managed care revenue on 72B. Third-party revenue from insurance carriers are reported on line 74. Federal grant revenue is reported on line 79. There are a number of predefined entries. I'll go over just a few, such as the U.S. Department of Labor, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, there is a predefined line for the Paycheck Protection Program, as well as FEMA grants, FCC grants, and federal tax credits that are reported as revenue. Report state grant revenue on line 80. There are a number of predefined entries such as Department of Health, Department of Labor, and New York State Office of Children and Family Services, to name a few. Report Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program on line 82. This pertains to OASIS and OPWDD programs only. Report gifts, legacies, bequests, donations on line 83, and this pertains to monetary contributions derived from gifts, legacies, bequests, and donations. Please note non-monetary donations and contributions are reported as reconciling items on the reconciliation if the schedule is required. Additional information is available in the FAQ section of the CFR manual. Report prior period rate adjustments on line 86. This is revenue from a rate appeal, rate adjustment, or retroactive contingency contract. Do not include net deficit funding on this line. For SADs, report any reconciliation adjustments from a prior period, including any reconciliation tuition adjustments included as part of the prospective tuition rate. This line is not completed for OASIS and OMH providers. And OPWDD providers report Medicaid recoveries on this line. Report net deficit funding on lines 93 and 103. This includes state aid received via direct contract with one of the DMH agencies, or state aid received indirectly from one of the DMH agencies through an LGU. Report other revenue on line 94. For OASIS providers, report closely allied entity revenue. For OMH, include safety net payments and VAP Medicaid revenue. And for OPWDD providers, include assistive supports revenue, revenue for non-Medicaid eligible individuals under predefined OPWDD state paid. Report the provision for bad debts on line 97. This is a revenue deduction. Report the provision for bad debts as a deduction from revenue, provided the revenue is not reported net of the provision for bad debts. The presentation of the provision for bad debts on the CFR should be consistent with that of the provider's audited income statement. And to summarize, the revenues, GAAP adjustments to revenues, and non-GAAP adjustments to revenues categories each have an other line for miscellaneous items. Information is entered through a line detail box. Revenue items of 1,000 or more require detail, and revenue items of less than 1,000 each may be grouped in a predefined line entry called all items less than 1,000 each. And next, I will be passing you off to Nellie Gutos, who is your next speaker.
Hello, this is Nellie Gutos from the New York State Education Department. I will be presenting the agency fiscal summary in the Cfr 2 and Cfr 2A, and I will also be reporting on the agency administration cost reporting on Cfr 3 and the Cfr reconciliation schedules. First, I'm going to break up this presentation that can be dry with all these numbers to give you a short story. There was a group of tourists that went to the Grand Canyon. The tour guide said, it took 1 million years for this to be carved out. And one of the tourists said, it must be a government project. Now, this has been a big government project for us, and we have really detailed slides, and the team has done a wonderful job. So I'm going to try to pick out the highlights of the different slides rather than read everything to you. Right here, we have the Cfr 2 Agency Fiscal Summary. This is going to be your favorite form to complete. The reason I say this is because 95% fills in automatically. As you see, there's a column for each agency, and as well as a total in column 1. Column 9 is the only column that you can complete. Items that go in here are if your agency has other activities that are not required to be filed on a CFR, they go in here. If you provide management services for another entity, if you have fundraising expenses, they go in this column, or any unrealized gains or losses. You can also find in one of the appendixes other items that could be on that. So I wouldn't move down. So this is what I mentioned already, that the CFR2 captures the expenses of the entire agency, and each agency has its separate column. And as I went over, column 9 is the only column you could enter is for other expenses, and here are some examples. What the CFR2 is used is to distribute agency administrative expenses between the CFR reporting programs, which includes personal services, vacation leave, fringe benefits, and OTPS, less raw materials, because agency admin should not be allocated on the supplies that are used to operate a program. There's reconciliation schedules are required for anybody who files a full CFR, as long as they're not on a different financial reporting period. If you are required to file a reconciliation schedule, you must complete it, otherwise you will not be able to pass the CFR validation and get a DCN number. Here is an example of the reconciliation expense side. As you can see on this example, there were some items that needed to be reconciled between, and there was elimination of intercompany cost and depreciation differences. They get detailed in the drop-down box and they make the reconciliation work. Here is an example of the reconciliation for the revenue side of expenses. They also had some adjustments. You can see them on the right side of the screen, the prior period revenues and elimination of intercompany transactions. Next is the CFR2. Now, what is the CFR2 used for? This basically is a form where you will input information from your CPA statements, and what it does, it provides provider-specific data analysis and industry-wide statistics. This is used by various agencies to look at the health of a particular agency and for the industry-wide statistics. Here is an example of the CFR 2A, where you're entering numbers in column 2 and 3 on the bottom. You can see where they entered data. And this is, the next one is the second part. I don't know if it switched. This is the second page of it. Next, we're going to talk about the CFR 3 agency administration. What this form is used for is to compile all the administrative agency expenses, the part of the agency that sets the overall direction for the agency. It includes general record keeping and financial management, governing board activities, and public relations, as long as the public relations isn't associated with fundraising and special events. The total agency administration costs for the entire provider are reported on a single CFR 3 schedule when completing a full CFR. Abbreviated CFR filers complete the agency administrative worksheet in lieu of this form. Here is an example of the CFR 3 agency administration, the first part. It includes personal services, vacation leave accruals, fringe benefits, other than personal services, equipment, property, and any parent agency allocations. There are a few lines I'd like to give you further detail on. At line 6, there's audit legal accounting. This includes the cost of other accounting services such as payroll services and the CFR audit costs. Line 14 has contracted personal services such as management, consulting, and IT support. Items on line 14 need to be itemized. Cost in excess of $5,000 must be listed in the detail box separately by description and amount, and items costing less than $5,000 may be aggregated and listed as such. Insurance general. Sometimes it gets confused what goes in this. It should include general liability, bonding for crime, fidelity, professional malpractice, vehicle or other insurance costs related to agency administration. You're not to report insurance expenses related to equipment or property on this line. Here is the second part of the agency administration schedule. The Cfr 3 expenses other lines. The OTPS, equipment, and property each have other lines for miscellaneous items. You need to put, there's a drop-down box. You need to provide the detail for any items costing more than $1,000 or any items costing less than $1,000. You can group them together and list them as such. On CFR line 41, there can be adjustments for non-allowable costs. This doesn't mean that it isn't an allowable cost per the IRS or other thing. It means that it's not a non-reimbursable cost. So you can subtract these costs out. It may be that you provide a 401k for just the management, so you would need to adjust that out. When you do this, you need to enter the line number that the expense appears on. Sometimes I see the mistake if it was a fringe benefit, which would have been on line 4, but the total fringes are on line 5, that it is subtracted from line 5. But the expense should be subtracted from line 4, where the expense actually occurs. You can refer to Appendix X for some, but not all, non-allowable costs. And if there were any costs for related party transactions disclosed on the Cfr 5 in excess of actual cost, you can report that here too on this line. The amounts entered must be greater than or equal to 0. The next line, line 42, is the net agency administration. This is the amount that's going to be allocated using ratio value. Here is the second page of the Cfr 3, which shows in lines, the beginning lines, the calculation of the operating costs of each individual agency. The next group of lines, the next 3 lines, shows the calculation of the ratio value factor that will be allocated. And then from line 55 through 62, you will see the actual amount of agency administration that is allocated to each agency. Ratio value administrative expenses are allocated to all agency funding sources using the ratio value method. The method uses operating costs of the program sites as the basis of the allocation. Operating costs are defined as personal services, vacation leave accruals, fringe benefits, and OTPS, less raw materials. And the Cfr 3 uses a 2-step process to allocate agency administration costs. The first step is total corporate agency administration expenses from Cfr 3 line 42 are allocated to each New York State funding agency. Operating costs for programs 0880 and 0890 are excluded from this ratio value calculation. The second step in the ratio value allocation is performed at each individual state agency level, where each agency can exempt certain programs from getting the full amount or from getting agency administration allocations at all. A list of the program codes not included in Step 2 calculation can be found in Section 15 of the CFR manual. For those who do not file a CFR 3 or not required, we didn't want to leave them out. For these abbreviated filers, they have an agency admin worksheet, which is shown here. Summary of the agency administration, that all agencies have it, agency administration, and all expenses need to be distributed fairly. And the way that is done is by using the required ratio value method to allocate these agency administration expenses to the core reports. Ratio value is based on operating costs, as I said. For more information on the CFR 3 schedule, please see Section 15 of the CFR manual. And Appendix I also gives you more information, and Appendix T gives you more information on completing agency administration on abbreviated CFR. This concludes my section, and I will pass this on to the next person.
Hi, this is Paul Green from the New York State Office of Addiction Services and Supports. Thank you for joining us today. We've talked about the CFR 1, 2, 3, and 4. These reports schedules are all connected. If you put a number on the CFR 3, it will eventually be proportioned as per the 2 and wind up on the 1. If you put a number on the 4, it also will be affecting the other reports. So these are all connected. The CFR 5 and the CFR 6 are standalone schedules, okay? If you put a number on the CFR 5, you don't have to worry about it going anywhere else. It's not going to affect your other reporting, all right? So that's a big thing to take away from this. The CFR 5 is required for full abbreviated and mini abbreviated CFRs, not Article 28 abbreviated CFRs. It's all about transactions with related organizations or individuals. It's used to report transactions including compensation between the reporting entity, its affiliates, principal owners, management, and members of the immediate family, and any other party with which the reporting entity may deal when one party has the ability to significantly influence management or operating policies. So the reason I read that is to say there has to be two things here. There has to be a relationship, and two, the related party has to have the ability to significantly influence management or operating policies. So when you're thinking about this, if you have a nephew who's in a relatively low level at another agency, you have to think about whether they have the ability to influence management's decisions. Okay? If they don't, then they are not a related party and do not need to be reported here. Okay? If you're questioning whether they do or they don't, then the conservative approach would be to report them, because it always looks better to report it than to not report it and have us come wondering why it wasn't reported later. Okay. So two things: there has to be a relationship, and there has to be ability to significantly influence decision making. There's two questions on the CFR 5. The first one is, during the reporting period, were there any payments to a related organization or individual? And you answer yes or no. So again, it's highlighted there, payments to We're not interested in money coming from the related party. We're talking about payments to the party. If the answer is yes, then sections B and C of the schedule must be completed. Okay. The second question, and this is not for SED, this is just the other agencies. During the reporting period, were there any transactions with related organizations or individuals from which the service provider received any financial aid or assistance, or to which the service provider provided financial aid or assistance? This is usually in the form of a loan, some type of a loan. I've actually seen loans that were made to the executive director from the agency, and I've also seen loans that were made to the agency by the executive director. Okay. If the answer is yes, you would check that here, and you would have to complete section D. If the answer is no to both of these questions, then you are done with the Cfr 5, and you can move on to the Cfr 6. But we're going to continue as if the answer was yes. So if you said yes, you made a payment to a related organization, then you have to fill in section B saying what was the payment. Okay, it was this program, column 3. It's leased space, that's the description. It's the name of the agency, the relationship, the amount of the transaction. So in this case, you paid $68,620 of rent to a related party. Okay. Now, next to it is column 8. That's an allowable cost. All right. And then finally, column 9 is an adjustment to cost. All right. Let me skip down to the next one first. Salary and fringe benefits. So you paid Sally Fields, who turns out to be a relative. Okay. You paid her $10,200. It's okay to hire a relative, but you have to consider the facts. Would you have been able to pay somebody else the same, a less amount, a fair market value amount of less for the same work? And if that was the case, if you could have got somebody else to do it for $8,200, then the allowable cost would have been $8,200, and the adjustment would be $2,000. And by adjustment, that means you would go back to your CFR and you would subtract $2,000 as a non-allowable expense. Okay, so what you can take away from that is that you can hire your relatives. However, you can only pay them fair market value. So if you can hire somebody else to do the same job for less, then that is the amount that you're going to be allowed to expense. Okay. In this case, the fair market value is $10,200, so that is the allowable amount. Therefore, there is no adjustments to be made back to the CFR. Okay. So for salary and fringe and things like that, it's fair market value. But for leased space and leased rental property costs, it's the lower of fair market value or the related party's actual costs. I had a bad case of this a long time ago. The executive director owned the property. The property was rented from the executive director. And then there was a falling out. And when it came time for the related party to provide their operating costs, they would not do it. Therefore, their total operating costs were zero. Therefore, the allowable cost was zero, and the amount of the transaction all had to be adjusted out. So that's an extreme scenario. But the point here is, in this case, you paid $68,620 in rent. You're going to go to the next screen, which is section C, and you're going to figure out what is the allowable cost. Well, for that property, there was $10,000 depreciation, $25,000 interest. It all adds up to $67,620. So that is the related party's cost for that property. So even though fair market value was $68,000, related party's actual cost is only $67,000, and therefore there's a $1,000 adjustment that needs to be made, okay? So again, for salaries and such, it's fair market value, but for property, it's the lower of fair market value or the related party's actual costs. Actual costs would be everything from landscaping to mortgage to painting, maintenance, and such. Okay. Now, I said that the Cfr Iv is a standalone document. Therefore, if you incurred a $1,000 item here, you have to remember to go back to the Cfr 1 and put it in as a $1,000 adjustment to lease, and you would do that on line 66. Okay, so you've written down the full amount of the expense, because we always want you to write down the full amount of the expense. So for rental, you wrote down $68,620. However, further down under adjustment / non-allowable, that includes $1,000 of adjustment because of that rule. Okay. So Cfr 5, that's what you got to keep an eye open for. Related party transactions. Also, the second question is number 2, and that was money, that was financial aid or assistance to which the service provider provided or from which the service provider provided. And again, that's usually in this a loan, and this is where you would fill it out in the section D by putting the name, address, city, state, relationship, to which and from which. Okay, again, if you have this type of information, you want to put it down. You do not want to look like you're hiding something. Okay. The Cfr 5, if you were unsure if you have related party transactions, speak with the executives of the agency. They should know. You could also look at your financial statements. The notes to your financial statements usually will mention whether there are related party transactions. Okay. Cfr 6, Governing Board and Compensation Summary. So the Cfr 6 is to be completed by service providers. This is for the Governing Board members. All employees reported under position title code 601, 602, 603, employees earning more than $125,000 per year, and the 5 highest paid independent contractors earning more than $50,000 per year. It's required with a full submission and an abbreviated, but not with Article 28 or mini abbreviated. Okay. So the first question has to be answered yes or no. The question is, do any employees of your agency also serve on the governing authority? So the governing authority is your board of directors, okay? If yes, click yes and then provide the information about that person. Well, for most of you not-for-profits out there, I would expect the answer to be no. Okay, employees may sit in on meetings of the board of directors, but they do not have a voting right. Therefore, they do not actually serve on the governing authority. Therefore, the answer is no. However, for the for-profits out there, you may be the opposite, and yes, you may have somebody sitting on an employee who sits on the board. So either way, you answer the question and you tell us the information, and then we move on to section number 2. Okay, only include compensation paid to individuals as in their capacity as officers, directors, or trustees of your agency's board of directors. So in other words, section 2 is list the names of individuals who receive compensation as board officers. Okay. Again, for you not-for-profits, I don't think that you're going to have anybody to input here. Your board members are generally volunteers doing it from the goodness of their heart, and therefore there's nothing to report here. And keep in mind, if you reimburse them for travel expenses or hotel lodging or such, that is reimbursement. That is not compensation. So that does not need to be reported here. But for you for-profits, if you do pay your board members, then this is where you would list that information. Section 3, this affects most agencies. Section 3 requests information on the highest paid employees of your agency. In this section, report all employees under the position title code 601, 602, and 603, regardless of their total annualized salaries, and all employees that receive a total annualized salary and contracted payment amount in excess of $125,000. Okay, so I guess the concept here is we're tracking the pay of the 601, the 602, and the 603, and everybody making over $125,000. So here's a screenshot, and let's just go through it one by one. So the first two, the 601 and the 602, they're at amount paid of $260,000 and $195,000. I just made those numbers up, so don't get excited. They're both over the $125,000, and they're both the 601 and 602, so they both have to be reported here. Okay. Over to the far right, column 9, there's a $1,200 other benefit. We're going to discuss that in a minute. So next we go down to the psychiatrist, $195,000. So again, they're over the $125,000, so they need to be reported. The next one is only $112,000, director of division. And you'd say, why does that need to be reported? Well, they only worked 0.85 of a year. So their annualized salary would be $131,000, which is over the $125,000. Therefore, they need to be reported. Okay, so that's where the FTE comes in. If they work the whole year, it's 1. If they work less than that, then it's a point something. And if it's a point something, it's mathematically calculated to be a full year's annualized salary. Next is the utilization review person. $110,000, which is lower, but there was a contracted payment of $20 that brings it up to $130. Okay, and then finally $85,000 for the controller. At one, and you say why do they? Well, they're a 603, 601, 602, and 603 right here all have to be reported. So even that they're under the 125, they still need to be reported. So that is Section 3 of the CFR 6. Now, the $1,200 I spoke of. So I think we've hit on it a couple of times, but there's non-allowable expenses. Okay, and basically an allowable expense is something that's not offered to all the employees. In this particular case, it's a car offered to the executive director for commuting purposes. Okay, $1,200. Since the CFR 6 is a standalone document, you have to go back to the CFR 3 and manually input it as an adjustment for non-allowable costs of $1,200. Okay, so that's just a reminder. We always want the expense reported, but then we always want the adjusted amount to be backed out. All right. Finally, Section 4 of the CFR 6 requests the 5 highest paid independent contractors. Independent contractor, accounting, legal, medical, consulting, and other. And if there's other, there's a drop-down box for you to type it in. Okay. It's only for contractors that break the threshold of $50,000. So if you don't have anybody, you may not have to complete this. It could be an individual or a firm. So if you pay them by a 1099 miscellaneous, then you have to consider whether they should be reported here or not. All right. That's the CFR 6. DMH1 is the last of the core schedules. Okay, it's the DMH1 Program Fiscal Summary. For you full CFR filers, the DMH-1 is just that. It's a summary of everything that you've already done, okay? When you get to the DMH-1, you can't make any changes on it. If you don't like a number there, you have to go back to the core schedule where that number came from, and you have to fix it there, okay? But the DMH-1 is also a bridge. It's a bridge to the claim, which is the DMH-2. We're going to talk about the DMH-2 tomorrow. But this is a bridge, and there's a reason for the bridge. The core schedules are used for one purpose. They're used for fiscal analysis, okay? They're generally used for the state agencies. The claims are generally used for the claiming department, but they're also used by the counties or the cities and such. Sometimes the counties want the presentation to be different than the state does, and vice versa, okay? So by that I mean the state said that you had to report each program, each site, in its own column. So if you had one program, but you had 3 different sites for that program, they would be in 3 different columns on your core schedules. Well, if for some reason the county wants those 3 sites combined, maybe they're on the same contract, and if they tell you and ask you to combine them, okay, if they don't ask you or tell you to do so, I would probably leave them separate. You know, the more conservative way is to leave them separate in their own columns. But if they ask you to combine them, this is how you do that. It says here, if multiple occurrences of a program type have the same index code, the data for that program type will be aggregated into a single column on the DMH-1. So if you had 3 different sites of the same program on the core schedules, but if you use the same index code, 00, 00, and 00, those 3 sites for the same program would be aggregated into one column on the DMH-1, which would then transfer over to the DMH-2. So now you've made both parties happy. The state has their individual listing of the sites, and the county has them all grouped together in one column. Okay. Again, generally, and this is what the next one says, if a multiple occurrence of a program type have different index codes, the data for the program code with a unique index code will be reported in its own column on the DMH-1. So for those 3 sites, if you use index code 00, 01, and 02, then they will stay in their own columns. And to be conservative, that's probably how you should report it, using different index codes, unless told otherwise. Okay? So just an FYI, if at some point you're pulling out your hair because you feel like the state's telling you they want it one way and the county is telling you they want it the other way, well, we've thought of that, and there is a software, there are things in the software that will allow you to make both parties happy. So you just have to, if you have to touch base with us at that time to discuss it, we can help you then, okay? Okay, so that was for all you full filers. If you were an abbreviated filer or an Article 28 abbreviated filer, you actually don't complete the Cfr 1 and such. You just start right here at the DMH-1, okay? So all the information needs to be manually entered, all right? Again, you can also put them in their own individual columns, or you can combine them at that point, okay? But again, it's more conservative to put them in their own individual columns. So an abbreviated filer starting a DMH-1 would follow all the same rules that were applied to the Cfr 1. It's full accrual basis of accounting. Equipment costing $5,000 or more must be depreciated. Agency admin is distributed between agencies using a ratio value. All right. And this is a screenshot of the DMH1. Okay. So, again, we said it's a fiscal summary because if you'll notice, previously there was like 30 lines of other than personal services. There was food, there was maintenance, there was repairs, supplies, all sorts of different items. Well, here there's only one line other than personal services, okay? So if you're an abbreviated filer, you don't have to fill in all the lines. You just have to fill in these few lines. Makes your life a little bit easier, all right? There's 3 tabs here: units of service and expenses, program revenues, and adjustments to revenue. So for an abbreviated filer, you'd have to fill all this in. For a full filer, it would have already been filled in for you because all the information would have come before. This is some of the similar things that we've already said. If you have small amounts of money, you have $432 from a car wash, $718 from a vending machine, $29 from a sale of T-shirts. You don't have to list them all individually. You could put them all together and group them under $1,000. Okay. If your small items start adding up to a lot of money, then we're probably going to want you to break them out individually, or it's not individually, but into groups, anyways. Okay. Also, the software offers drop-down boxes for federal grants, line 25, and state grants, line 26. Oops, sorry about that. Okay. There we go. All right. And then you got your revenues, your participant fees, your Medicaid, fee-for-service, Medicaid managed care, other third parties. And down here, you have your federal grants, state grants. And then when you go to the next slide, is line 28 is your net deficit funding. And then these are your program adjustments to revenues. Okay, for adjustments to revenues, we generally don't have a lot of adjustments to revenues, but if you feel you do, refer back to the manual and it will give you some additional guidance. The end result here is line 44, net operating cost. Okay, net operating cost is important. Net operating cost is your total expenses less all your other revenues except for state aid. Okay, so total expenses less your vending machine sales, your car wash, your Medicaid, your fee-for-service, your third-party money, anything you get except for state aid. And then when you get down to your net operating cost, that is up to that amount is what we're willing to pay in state aid. Okay. We're going to get into that tomorrow. The main thing to consider here is you're looking at your DMH1, you're feeling pretty good, everything appears to match your books, and now it's time to consider doing the claim. To consider doing the claim, you want to start from your core, because your core is rooted in your financials and it's solid, it's accurate. So you're going to transfer, bottom left-hand corner, you're going to transfer to the DMH2. You're going to transfer all this information over to the DMH2. But don't worry, if you don't like some of the numbers on the DMH2 for claiming, you can go in and make adjustments there, okay? But at least now you're starting with solid numbers. You're starting with your personal services, which shouldn't change between the DMH1 and the DMH2, unless the accounting method changes or something like that. So, you know, and then fringe benefits probably shouldn't change, and OTPS probably shouldn't change. So at least you're transferring over solid numbers, and then if you do need to make any adjustments to equipment or property, then you'll just go directly into the DMH2 and make your adjustments. Okay, so I am done with that. I am going to hand the microphone back off to our host for some closing statements.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you all once again for participating in the CFR training webinar for 2021 calendar year consolidated fiscal report. Just in case, before you jump off, just in case if you guys missed the beginning of the webinar, can you guys please take time to fill out the post survey after you leave the event? It will help us make the training better each time. We do look at it and we do take any concerns in, and we try to make the presentation better. Also, the webinar has been recorded and will be posted online shortly. Email will be sent out notifying you of the location, just in case you missed it or you want to listen to it again or you want to pass it on to a colleague. And also, the Q&As will be carefully reviewed and answered. And then once we're done answering, we will post this online as soon as possible. This does take time, but we try to go into as much depth as we can for your questions. I will leave the Q&A function open for about 5 minutes after the seminar ends so that anyone could ask any additional questions that need to be asked. And if not, we have another session tomorrow. You could ask the questions tomorrow. Other than that, once again, we appreciate it and thank you for attending this session.